Hey, Jennifer. Hi, Dr. Brown. How are you? You're on mute.
Yeah, I just sent you an email a second ago. I've got a short amount of time this morning that I can be here. I'm headed out of state to get married this weekend, so
Oh, very nice.
Wow!
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
yeah.
that's very
So
nice.
yeah, so I'm yeah, so I'm trying to get get
You've got something more. Look, something really exciting happening for you. I'm
yeah,
so
yeah.
happy for you.
Thank you, thank you.
We have you at the top of the agenda this morning,
Hmm.
because we wanted to be respectful of your time, but we certainly wanted to hear your expertise this morning.
Sure,
Before we get started, while we're waiting for everybody, let me introduce you, Jennifer, to
sure.
the co-chair of the committee, Anthony Wright.
Hello.
Hi there. How are
Now
you?
you know all about my personal life before we've actually met. Yeah. And do you work in the mayor's office, Anthony?
No, but I did several years ago from 2007 to 2010. But
Uh,
now I'm back in the private sector.
okay.
Well, we'll
I'm
be starting very shortly.
very
Sure.
shortly.
Mhm. Well, while we're waiting, where are you going to get married?
Gulf Shores,
Ooh,
uh, with my fingers crossed and, hoping for no, just it's a small family affair. So
Sure, sure.
they do require masks there now, thankfully.
All right.
So yeah, so we're just gonna go down there and yeah, come back. So
get her done,
at
huh?
my age, you don't do a lot of planning. You just oh
Now,
my
do we have, I'm sorry.
no,
Go
I'm
ahead.
not there.
I was going to say, do we have members of the committee that don't have their cameras on? I see 8 participants, but I can only see 4 of us. Do you all see everyone?
Mm.
Yeah.
No, I
Let's turn on our cameras.
don't.
If I have to turn on mine, you definitely need to turn yours on.
That's the rule for sure.
Yeah. Let's see who we got. Patrice is on, not showing her camera. I saw Bishop several times. He's not showing his now. Okay.
Anthony, 10 members accepted the meeting request today.
Okay. Thank you, Bishop. Appreciate you turning on your camera, sir.
How you doing?
All right. All right. I know you have another engagement that you have to get to.
Yeah, unfortunately I do. So I'll probably only be on here about 30 minutes.
Okay.
Hi, Aaron.
Good morning.
Salvador. Good morning.
Let's see, who else do we have? Now we're up to 12. Good morning, Kim.
Good morning, Anthony. How are you doing?
Good. Good to see you, Sister Patrice. Thank you for turning on your camera.
Daryl's back. Well,
Daryl.
back from
Awesome.
vacation, but he's with us today.
That's
I'm
great.
still on vacation. Actually, this is my last day.
Yes.
Trying to
Thank
get
you.
it in.
We are so thankful for your commitment.
Well, I appreciate y'all having me, so I'll try to do
Yes,
my
sir.
part.
Let's see, how are we doing time-wise?
It's 11.
2 minutes. We'll give it another couple minutes. Just so you all know, I have my best dad ever cup that I'm drinking out of.
Uh-oh.
Father's Day gift.
Is that the one I let you borrow?
Oh,
You weren't supposed to tell him, man. I want to think my daughters gave it to me. One more minute. Sharita, did you hear from Tyrone?
Tyrone is actually still on vacation. He won't be present today.
Oh, wow. Okay. So let's see then. And what about, get my list here. Dr. Harris? Sharita, did you hear from Dr. No? Okay. And what about Senator Thomas? Did he mention whether or not he could be here?
He accepted it. He could be running a few minutes late. I know Councilmember Mark
Swanson.
Swanson's running a little late.
Okay. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Let's call this meeting to order. This is the meeting and the Commission for Racial Justice and Equality, the committee meeting that's looking at education and economic outlook. We thank you all for being with us today. We had a very rich discussion last week. Before I go any further, there's a statement that I must read. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, state of emergency, and Governor Beshear's executive orders regarding social distancing, this meeting is being held via teleconference pursuant to Senate Bill 150, as signed by the governor on March 30th, 2020, and Attorney General Opinion 20-05, and in accordance with KRS 61.826, because it is not feasible to offer a primary physical location for the meeting. So we're calling the meeting to order. I'm excited to see all the members today. Thank you all for your participation. As I stated before, we did have rich discussion last week, and we did produce a document that really tried to capture everybody's point of view that we need to look at in this committee. I do want to make a couple of announcements before getting started. We did meet with the co-chairs for the Mayor's Commission, and we talked about several things yesterday. One in particular, please put on your calendar July 28th at 6:30. That will be a town hall meeting where we will be one of the committees presenting that day and listening to the community. There is a statement that came out. There is the flexibility, if need be, to have another meeting or two if we think we need to finish up our work. We recognize that what we're tackling with these issues are very big monsters to try to tackle, but they're very, very important issues for our community. So it may take a little longer than just the 60 days that we have identified. So be aware that if we do need to go another meeting or two, we certainly can do that. The other thing that came out of that is they're going to be looking for us to kind of prioritize what we come up with in terms of suggestions and recommendations. So as you know, we have quite a number of lists of outcomes that we've sent to you. We will need to kind of whittle that down and try to get to the top three. And I would say both, Sharon, for education and economic outlook, right?
yeah.
So we have a total of 6. Everyone has, I think, received a copy of the minutes. Did everyone receive those minutes that were sent out earlier?
Yes, sir.
And if you've had a chance to review them, I will entertain a motion to accept and approve. Do I have a motion? Would anybody like to? I need a second.
Second.
Very good. Thank you so much. Let's all say aye to vote in favor.
Aye.
Very good, very good.
Anthony,
Well,
was that Sister Patrice that seconded the motion on the approval of the minutes?
Yes. We mentioned in our last meeting that from time to time, we're going to bring subject matter experts before you all to help us work through what we're deciding to do for the community. And today is our first guest. I want to have Sharon Price introduce our guest today.
I would like to introduce to the committee Dr. Jennifer Grisham Brown. She is a professor from the Department of Early Childhood Education at the University of Kentucky. She is also the program chair in interdisciplinary early childhood education. She is a faculty director in the Early Childhood Laboratory School at the University of Kentucky. She is also the co-author of 2 books on blended education and early childhood education, and assessment practices in early childhood education as well. Her research interests include authentic assessments, tiered instruction, and inclusion of children with significant disabilities. Dr. Dr. Jennifer Grisham Brown is co-founder of the children's home and preschool in Guatemala City called Hope for Tomorrow, where she accompanies students for the Education Abroad program. Thank you so much, Dr. Jennifer Grisham Brown. We appreciate you being here today. I know that you have a big weekend ahead of you, so we're gonna jump right in.
Sure.
We wanted your expertise on some of the recommendations and the conversations that we were having. And so if you could talk to us about what your thoughts are about the duration or surrounding the duration of time that preschoolers are in school. So we know that in some of the classrooms in Fayette County Public Schools, some of the children are there for about 2 hours and 55 minutes, and they have other classrooms that are there or in session for longer periods of time than that. And we just wanted to hear your thoughts so that you would be able to guide us in whether we move forward with this recommendation, whether we amend our recommendation. And so if you could just talk to us, if you would start by talking to us about the duration of time for students, that would be great.
Okay. Well, thank you all for having me today. So I think that, when we're talking about duration or length of preschool, what we're really talking about is a kind of a research term, which is dosage of intervention. And if you think about, any kind of dosage when it comes to any kind of issue that you're trying to address, obviously the larger the dosage, the more likely that you're going to achieve positive outcomes. And so if you kind of follow that train of thought when it comes to implementing early childhood programs, then obviously what the research has shown is that larger dosages result in more positive outcomes. And so let me just break that apart just a little bit. So the majority of children that are, all of the children that are receiving, free public preschool in Kentucky are children that are at risk for or those who have disabilities. And so in Kentucky, we define those that are at risk for having disabilities as being children who are from low socioeconomic backgrounds. And there is seminal research in the field of early childhood that suggests that children from low socioeconomic backgrounds are more at risk for school failure because of the conditions in which they live, and more specifically, related to the amount of language stimulation that they receive when they are between the ages of birth and 3 years of age. And if you want information about that research, Sharon's probably already cited it, but it's the seminal research by Hart and Risley. And so, so therefore, because of the population of children that we are targeting for preschool in Kentucky, then that would suggest that that is a more needy population of children. And therefore, logically, it makes sense that the larger dosage, therefore being the longer or more number of hours that they're spent in preschool, is going to be impactful to their future outcomes. And so, that's kind of a long answer to the fact, all of our policies around early childhood education in Kentucky, of course, are dictated by funding. We've been trying for many, many years to increase the poverty level for children to receive free preschool in Kentucky. And for years, many of us have called for universal pre-K for all of our preschools in Kentucky. In some of our districts, we have nearly not 100% of the children receive free and reduced lunch and therefore automatically receive a free preschool program. But we still are not making any headway, in terms of fiscally being able to support free preschool. And in fact, there have been cuts in recent years. So, is that answering your question?
It does. And if anyone has any questions as we go along while we have our expert here, it looks like Daryl does.
Yes, so as we look at the, I guess, measure of success for this commission, and the conversation around time for preschool, is the question more about access and opportunity to early childhood education for that student population that come from low socioeconomic backgrounds, as well as areas of high concentration of poverty. And so my question really is, as we look to make a recommendation, as I mentioned with the vice chair of this commission, Mr. Wright, we have to remind ourselves continually that the issue is about what systemic issues in our society has created the barriers for the lack of high quality early childhood education. Poverty did not create itself. What social constructs in our society have created these barriers, not the system necessary that educate them, and that we have our own challenges, but what are the societal issues? And poverty, it's not a destination that determines a kid's ability. I was one of those children, and some of you all on here they have that same declaration. So it did not dictate whether or not I was at risk. I just happened to live in poverty. I highly achieved out of that learning environment. So given that, the issue has to be, how do we get universal access for kids across our socioeconomic platform, high quality early childhood? We know 0 to 5 is the beginning of the achievement gap. It starts at that age group. It doesn't start when they arrive in our schools. We have to challenge of meeting those kids and moving them where they are. And we have an obligation to do that. But when it comes to this commission, and looking back and reading some of the notes from the minutes, I don't want us to get sideways and conflate the mayor's charge of a group of 70 people that actually kind of redirects the issue onto some other stuff, when at the core of it is historical barriers that are put in place based on society's construct around racism and poverty. So I want to kind of keep it there, if I could, from an educational standpoint, to ensure that our obligation is not misled, particularly my participation, so that people don't misunderstand that we kind of sugarcoated the issue and dealt with this in a passive way.
Patrice?
Thank you. And thank you for that, Brother Daryl. I echo your concern about the conversation about eliminating poverty and creating access. I wanted to switch to asking Dr. Grisham Brown about after school programs and summer programs. When I was in school, we had summer school. And I wanted to know, one of our recommendations was about providing funds for after school programs, after 5 things in the community. We had this conversation in light of this new achievement gap that will be this widening achievement gap that will probably, that is expected to happen as a result of NTI. Could you talk to us about any research or information you have about how after school programs, community programs, whether formal or informal, have any impact on closing that achievement gap, and how we could best spend those resources if we have any?
I really don't. I really don't know about that. I mean, I think that your concern is certainly valid, that, we are going to likely see an increase in the achievement gap, based on what's going on. I mean, the rumor is, for example, in Fayette County, that not only will we not be increasing the number of hours that children will spend in preschool, but in fact, they're thinking about, because of the current situation, that children will receive, like, instead of 4 days or 5 days of preschool a week, they'll only receive 2. And so, I think that this is going to have to be some kind of a community effort, to try to, fill in those gaps for when children are not, going to be receiving any kind of additional support. But I don't have any specific research or know of any specific research about what that needs to look like.
Dr. Patrice Muhammad, just a quick comment on NTI, and I do appreciate that because we've learned over the past 4 months that we've got to take a dual generational approach to teaching in this new educational norm or abnorm, and families now having to become educators, supplemental educators, given the circumstances that COVID-19 has placed on teaching and learning. With that being said, we had started work with the United Way, several groups around collective impact, and Sharon is familiar with that work. And we were looking at opportunities like this. How can we, from a community-based collective impact approach, put systems into neighborhoods, after school, learning centers, service delivery sites, not just for teaching and learning, but for just-in-time needs, household needs, mental health, social emotional, things like that. And COVID has also slowed that work down. So we have a clear action plan that we were working on with that group around putting those structures into some of our promised neighborhoods immediately, actually brick and mortar locations in 2. And COVID has disrupted that, certainly. And so from our school district perspective, we are certainly that's one of our strongest assets, is how do we empower our families to become better teachers or educators in the home, and how do we now extend the doorsteps of our schools to the doorsteps of our home, given COVID. And so those are things we are strategically working on. We had a 3-day leadership workshop this week, and all of those things are factored in, the achievement gap, the learning slide, summer bridge, all that stuff. And so we're continually being nimble because, again, this is a new space that all of America has never had to deal with. We're borrowing. I told my wife yesterday that it's like Velcro. When whoever invented Velcro did it for a reason, because you can loosen and tighten it to fit and adjust whatever your needs are. Even take it off and put it back on, and it still sticks. And so that's what we're doing. We're listening to educator leaders across the country. When you hear stuff on the news about other school districts, Miami-Dade, California, Chicago, those are conversations that happen across this collaborative platform with us and other superintendents around what are we doing. And so if you hear it from them, you've also heard it from us, because it's the same conversations. I promise you, we're all going through this at the same time, at the same pace, and using shared best practices to figure it out.
I'm gonna switch gears just a little bit with Jennifer before she has to jump off. Reggie, you have you have a comment, Reggie?
I do, Sharon, because I didn't know what Dr. Grisham-Brown's time was, but I'd like to ask her a question.
Go right ahead, Reggie.
Thank you. Dr. Grisham-Brown, we've had Head Start in this country since 1965. Head Start was one of the War on Poverty programs implemented under the Lyndon Johnson administration. Okay. We're at 2020 now, 55 years since the inception of Head Start. And yet, if you look across the country, Lexington is not unusual. There are significant achievement gaps between Black children and white children, between brown children and white children, between impoverished children and white children, all over this country. Okay. So, there's certainly a question out there as to the efficacy of Head Start, since we have these achievement gaps that still are in existence in alarming numbers 55 years later. I want to present to you my approach, and I want you to give me your opinion, your professional opinion on whether you think this is a good approach, a bad approach, or something in between. Okay. We have something in this state now called the HANDS program that I've been an advocate for in the state legislature for the last 7 years. Are you familiar with the HANDS program?
Very.
Okay. I would like to see the HANDS program implemented from ages 0 to 3. Okay, right now it's 0 to 2. Okay, it's 0 to 3. I want to see that program funded for a 3-year period. Give parents education, training, counseling on how to raise children for a 3-year period. Okay. Then I want to see programs like Head Start and programs that deal with children in the lower socioeconomic group begin at 3 and have that available from 3 to 4. Okay. I've also been a strong proponent of universal early childhood education, strong proponent of that. To do it in this state now would cost an additional $40 million a year. But I want that. And I want to see Kentucky adopt an early childhood, mandatory early childhood education for all children. And I'm including middle income children in that range as well. Okay. Beginning at age 4. That's where I want to go on this issue that's so important to Sharon about, the 0 to 5 approach. I want your opinion. What do you think that is doable? What do you think that is desirable? What do you think that has any efficacy? I'd like to know your opinion on that.
Well, first of all, I'd be happy to do anything that I could to help you make those goals accomplished, because I believe in everything that you say. For 15 years, I did research on the quality of the early care and education system in Kentucky. And one year we did a study and we looked at how children in low income communities in the state, how they were performing on norm referenced assessments in comparison to children that were that same age. And what we found is that the children in our study between the ages of birth to 3 were performing 1 standard deviation below the norm in all areas of development. So somebody talked about the fact that the achievement gap does not start when children come to the doors of the school. And that study suggests to us that the achievement gap is starting between the ages of birth to 3. So I am a very, very strong proponent of birth to 3 programs for children, and think that the degree with which we can make those available to families who are struggling with parenting needs, families who are struggling with how to communicate, how to talk to their children, families who are living in crisis. I've been doing a tremendous amount of study about the adverse child experiences work that's being done by Nadine Burke Harris. If you all haven't read her book, The Deepest Well, I highly recommend it. And one of the things that they talk about is the extreme importance of providing high quality early care and education experiences, and teaching strategies to children who are living in trauma, which is often the case in some of our low income communities. So I'm a very, very strong proponent of birth to 3 programs. And I think that oftentimes we've spent so much time trying to support and promote universal pre-K, which I also think is extremely important, that we've kind of left out that birth to 3 population. And so the HANDS program is a nationwide model for home visiting, but yet we've continued to cut funding from that program to the point now where we have very few people who are administering that program, which is tragic as far as I'm concerned. There is ample data to show that the HANDS program decreases neglect and abuse, that families participate in that, the children are much less likely to be referred to social services, and we definitely need to be supporting that program. Universal pre-K, I think I've already spoken to that. I think that is something, that we need to, we're behind on, with that. I think that we need to, be supporting that. And I want to add something to this about this conversation of serving children that are birth to 5, and that as a teacher educator, as someone who trains people who are going to be certified to support that population of children. I think it's our responsibility. And one of the things we've been trying so hard at UK to do to make sure that our future teachers that are working with children birth to 5 understand that we're looking at a whole system here. We're not just educating the child, but we're also trying to support that family and how they need to understand the impact of that family on that child, and how they need to educate families on how to best educate their child. The other thing that I think is so important, you started with talking about the efficacy studies of Head Start. And one of the problems I think that we've had with our studies of early care and education, which I've been part of for many years, is that we don't look at the quality. Somebody talked about the quality issue. And so just because we have Head Start, and I know our Head Starts here in Central Kentucky are good because Sharon has been running them for several years, but that's not the case everywhere. Not all Head Starts, just because it's a Head Start doesn't mean it's quality Head Start. And our research showed us here in Kentucky is that it's not just a matter of having Head Start, but you have to have high quality early care and education in order to impact those later child outcomes. And so we need to not just say, just get the programs, but we need to also try to impose upon those programs a high quality education of our teachers that are going to work with those children, and also a high quality program, which is not just that the classroom looks pretty, but it's also that the teachers know what they're doing when they're interacting with children so that they can support their language and development. And I'm sorry if I sound preachy. You can tell I'm a little passionate about this.
And Ms. Price, if you don't mind, can I dovetail off of Mrs. Brown's statements there? Because she talked about pretty much the whole continuum of from early childhood to post-secondary. And as I was reading through the notes, again, I don't want to digress us. I reflected on root causes and why we are where we are. And part of that is, and I will say, I'll call them 4 Ps, and you can call me P. Diddy at the end of this, because I'll end up with these P's. And some of that is preparation. How are our teachers being prepared to meet the needs of our students and families today? A lot of that is based on academic freedom from old yesterday models. And so post-secondary education has to reform how we are preparing teachers for today to meet the classrooms of today. Additionally to that is another P, which is pipelines. And then the other one will be pathways. And then I would also say participation. And so all of those things, when we look at this disparity based on racial justice and social justice, all deals with how we either allowing or not allowing a diverse population of students from a cross section of our communities access to those pathways, that participation. Are we preparing them? All of those things, again, is root causes to where we are now. We don't have a workforce because we don't have them coming out of our colleges and universities. We don't supply teachers ourselves organically. We get them from our colleges and universities. And then when we get them, are they skilled up and have the competencies to meet the needs of families? So that's another part I think we have to add to our recommendation, or we're going to miss the opportunity for higher level change. I participated on the commissioners, and it's a Commissioner of Education task force for years, where we drafted a strategic plan in this area. Unfortunately, the commissioners changed, and so that document got put on the shelf. And we're hoping that that could come back to life, because it addresses the equity again, and how do we get to the root causes of not having competent early childhood teachers, competent K-12 teachers, and then a workforce that mirrors the population based on the minutes on increasing teacher diversity in our schools. So that's my points there.
And Daryl, with that being said, and referring back to some of the conversations that have happened since our subcommittee has been developed, Jennifer, what do you think? We've had conversation about the need for additional minorities, teachers that look like the students in the classrooms. What kind of barriers? We're talking about increasing the number of minorities and specifically Black men that are in the classrooms and working in the school districts with, the children so that they have representation of themselves in the classroom. What are your thoughts on any barriers that you may know of or that you have experienced at the University of Kentucky with recruiting minority students to go through the program? And what, if anything, do you think can be done at the collegiate level to increase the recruitment level of minority teachers in the field of education?
Well, I don't want to throw everything back on the state, but I have to throw this back on the state. The Educational
Correct.
Standards Board. And that here's the issue. And I cannot speak specifically to men. I mean, I think that overall, we just see a lower number of men, period, minority or not, in the field of education, and particularly in early childhood education. I mean, I can think of probably, I've been teaching at UK for 25 years, and I can probably name on one hand the number of men that have been in our program. The issue, though, of minorities, the biggest barrier of all of it is that in order to get into the teacher education program in Kentucky, period, is teachers have to pass a test called the Praxis, the core Praxis.
That's correct.
And that test right there has prevented countless numbers of minority students from being able to be teachers. And it's abhorrent to me. I've complained to anybody that will listen about it. I have seen some of the finest, mostly young women, Latino, African-American young women who have wanted to be and would have been wonderful early childhood teachers who could not become early childhood teachers because they could not pass a test. And I have talked at length with our dean most recently about this. And I don't know what we do about it. I can have a student who has got a 4.0 who will, and has been working at our early childhood laboratory on campus. I've seen this person teach and interact with children and know they would have been a fabulous teacher, but I cannot get her in the program because of that test.
Can you go into a little detail as to why maybe, what are the problems? What makes that test problematic?
Culturally biased.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that. I mean, I do think that typically, if you look across the board at how minorities score on these standardized tests, they typically do not score well, most probably because they are biased tests. And so, therefore, when it's like the gatekeeper, if you will, to get them in. The particular the area that they really have the most problem with is in the area of math. And this goes across the board for all of our teachers that are trying to get in the program, not just African American or Latino. And so, we put in tutoring programs. We've had extra courses on it. We're trying to now change our gen ed curriculum so that the students will get, additional math instruction early before they take it. I mean, we've tried a number of things, but the bottom line is there are many universities right now, you all know this, that are not even requiring an ACT for students to get admitted to colleges because they recognize that these tests are biased. But yet we're doing it, for people to get into the teacher education program. And so it needs to change. And it's above my pay grade, other than just talking about it and, giving examples of it. It's above my pay grade to do anything about it. But that's your biggest barrier, Sharon.
Thank you.
And Senator Thomas, it looked like you were going to say something, so I don't want to add my comment before you go.
Well, I would be glad to defer to you, Daryl.
Listen.
I will definitely be glad to defer to you. But I have no problem speaking if that's okay with Sharon and Anthony.
Yes.
Okay. On your last point, Dr. Grisham Brown, as you probably are aware, just this week, the American College Education Organization, ACE, printed an editorial in which they advocated, the headline was, "Now is the time to eliminate the ACT and SAT." And they proposed that those tests need to be removed as a determinant point as to whether a student should be enrolled in college. So my question to you is, do you think we should recommend, as part of our task to the overall commission, that the ACT and SAT be eliminated by Kentucky colleges and universities as a criteria for admission?
As
Well, I
well
mean,
as the practice test.
yeah, I mean, that for us is not, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the figures are in terms of how many people from minority groups are not being admitted to Kentucky universities based on ACT scores. It's different at every university. And so, students that that can't get into UK, for example, can get into Eastern Kentucky. But even after they get into those universities, if they want to be teachers, they can't become teachers if they can't pass the praxis. So the bigger issue, as I see it related to teachers, has to do with that praxis score.
So
Can that test be eliminated?
We recommend the elimination of the practice test.
Yeah.
And I gotta admit, I have mixed feelings because I'm an attorney by profession. And of course, I can say, well, if you're gonna recommend eliminating the praxis, should you recommend eliminating the bar exam? And so, I've got to,
Well,
I don't want to be a hypocrite. I don't want to be a hypocrite here.
Right. Well, here's one of the things that you have to understand, though, is that teachers do have to take a second praxis when they complete their program, just like you do when you completed your law degree. So they have to take a competency test after they've been trained to show that they have the competencies to be able to teach preschool, early intervention, or kindergarten in my case. And so that's not going to, we're not suggesting that be eliminated. It's the elimination of the praxis to be admitted to the program in the first place. Now, if they go through the whole program and they don't have the competencies, first of all, we're going to weed them out, before they even finish. But secondly, if they can't pass the test, at the end, then I don't think they should be teachers. But that's not the problem with our folks. It's not the problem that they can't. It's the problem of getting in the first place.
It's the barrier, and it's absolutely a barrier to access. And then, the word of competency comes in. I would argue that many of our teachers that come out of our colleges and universities lack the cultural competencies to teach in our classrooms, not just the competencies to pass the praxis. And so when we looked at this at the Department of Ed level, through that task force, we talked about creating multiple measures for determining what that good teacher profile looks like, both on the beginning side of it and the exiting side. Also, if I can add, the part of this conversation that gets to the root of it is around fragility. Why fragility? Because many times you talk about why the test has to be modified. Oftentimes people want to look at it as an affirmative action approach, as if you're lowering the standard to allow someone in who could not meet the standard. And this is not the case. The ACT, the SAT, and the praxis has been researched to reveal that it is culturally biased, and it does create a barrier for gaining access. And so I engage in these conversations oftentimes and have to talk about race and ethnicity, and why is it that white Americans tend to fare well on those standardized tests versus people of color. It has nothing to do with their abilities, trust me. And so those are real conversations that will have to take place with people at the EPSB, the gatekeepers who control that part of it. And the beauty of this is it's now back at the Department of Education. The EPSB is not a standalone entity of itself. And so it fits right into the framework of what we're talking about around a strategic plan for changing diversity in the workforce. So hopefully we'll have some leverage now that it's back under the Department of Education.
Yes,
I may be, I may be getting a little too far into the weeds on this, and I'm just curious. So let's say, for instance, that test was taken out of the system and it opened it up to more people to be able to get into the program. Is the program itself at this point set up to be able to take, can it handle more people? And if it's not, is there a way to increase the opportunities to get people into it? I wouldn't want to take it out and then suddenly people still can't get in because there's not enough resources to be able to put them through. So I was just curious about that.
Right. Well, let me just, tell you that, and this maybe speaks to, I'm sorry, I can't see people's names. So I apologize. I'm not addressing you correctly, but, that the praxis is only one piece to admission to the teacher education program. So, we're not going to let somebody into our program, that doesn't have the dispositions or doesn't have, who is failing out of college, or, doesn't seem to have any real desire to be a teacher. So it's part of a multi approach. The praxis is just one. It's just that it's the barrier right now for so many of our minority students. In terms of, can we take more students? Yeah, certainly we could take more students. And in fact, our college has made a commitment, and our department at UK has made a commitment to early childhood and has increased the number of faculty that we've got so that we can grow our program.
And that's exactly what I wanted to know, because I didn't want to take away one barrier only to find out there's another one hidden behind another door. So that's good. That's very good to know.
Salvador, I saw your hand up a little bit ago. Was your question answered, or did you have a question that you wanted to ask, Jennifer?
You guys answered it.
Yeah. Before we leave the standardized testing, Jennifer, I would like to have your opinion. We're talking about the praxis, but I would also like to talk about the Brigance, that the screener that the children take to, yes, I see you smiling. The test that the children take to determine whether they're ready to learn. What can you say about your thoughts regarding the Brigance and its, does it tell whether children are capable of learning?
Hit on all my hot button issues. So, I mean, the only qualification for going into kindergarten should be that you are, 5 by whatever age it is that you're supposed to get into kindergarten. In no way. So part of a lot of the research that I do right now has to do with assessment. And Sharon well knows that I'm a very strong proponent of early childhood assessments that use methods where we observe children in their natural environments. I do not believe that we get accurate pictures of children's development by sitting them down at a desk and asking them to do something upon demand. I know that for a fact that we don't. And so when all of this business about a readiness screener started, I was part of some task force at the state, and I voiced my concerns about it, which, you never profit in your own land. I go all over the world and tell people about early childhood, but never a profit in your own land. So that wasn't listened to. So now we have this huge kindergarten readiness screener. What concerns me about it most, other than the fact that they're using inauthentic assessment methods for gathering information from children, usually the test is administered by people that do not know the child well, so we're not going to expect the child to perform well on it. And not only that, we're using that assessment information to make instructional decisions when that is not the reason that test was designed. That was not the purpose, never intended to be the purpose of the test. Besides all of that, we are determining school readiness based on variables that all teachers, that research, that parents believe to be variables that do not impact a child's readiness for school. In other words, we spend so much of our time in early childhood trying to teach letter, number, shape, size, letter, number, shape, size. When all of the research suggests that what determines a child's success in kindergarten and in school is their social emotional skills. And although we do that as part of the screener, we don't use that information to say whether or not a child is ready or not. And when Felicia Smith was at I had a whole Sunday conversation with Felicia about this when she was at the commissioner's office in the Kentucky Department of Ed, that, our research that we did at UK, any research, national research suggests that the variables of being able to take care of yourself, asking for help, being able to get along with other children, being able to follow instructions, all of those variables, those social emotional variables, are what is going to impact a child's school success, but yet we don't measure that, or we don't value that which we measure.
I figured that would be a top button for you, because one of the concerns that I have with it is, for me, I think that we're telling children that before they even go to kindergarten that they're failures, and then we announce it across the state of Kentucky that less than 50% of our children are ready to go to school, when, in my opinion, you should meet children where they are and progressively move forward from there. And part of the things that are on the assessment are certainly hurtful for low-income families and families living in poverty, because you're immediately asked off if you don't know your first full name, and we know that nicknames are very common in our communities. If you don't know your address and your telephone number, which we know that there are barriers with a lot of movement, within that population. And so to use that as a tool to say whether a child is ready to go to school or not, is something that I question. And so I was just wondering, what your thoughts were. I figured I would know, but I wanted to hear from you directly. Does anybody else have any questions or comments?
Sharon, I will add to that, on the part of our responsibility as a school district is that readiness part. And we've talked extensively about, are we effectively communicating with our parents and families when their children show up and they're not ready? I don't think, and the superintendent continues to support the fact that we have to tell parents at that moment that this is where your child is. Otherwise, we're complicit because they expect them to be somewhere else and they're not. And so when they get their reports a year later and find that there hasn't been a lot of growth, or their children are not meeting benchmarks, that's because we didn't have those early conversations at the beginning of entry to say, this is where your child is and here's our responsibility to move them and grow them. So that's our commitment, that we have to do better with our families of ensuring and letting them know where their children are so they can continue to help monitor progress across their K-12 process. So we have been talking extensively about that and how we've been complicit when parents don't even know that that's where their children are.
Can I chime in a little bit also?
Yes.
Rochelle Dodson here. Thank you. So I just want to start by saying that I think I'm on this subcommittee more for my financial economic background, because I work in bankruptcy, but I just wanted to let the group know some things that I may be able to connect us with or offer in terms of education. I'm on the Board of Regents at Transylvania. I graduated from Transy, and Transy is already a school that's not requiring ACT, SAT scores for admission. So if we want in-state models and data to look at, we may be able to connect with Transy to see how that's been going, because they've been doing that for a couple years now. If we want to look at, how that might translate over a broader audience. So I wanted to offer that. And then another thing that I think about often for myself and my family, I'm a mom to a 7-year-old. I was educated in public school in Kentucky up until the time that I went to Transy, but I have, since my daughter was 2, sent her to Montessori school here in Lexington. And when I think about some of the disparities in testing, using standardized testing and teaching styles in particular. That's why I chose Montessori. I'm a big public school proponent. I love public school, but I've sought out private education more for different educational models and different educational experiences, not obviously not diversity because there's not much in private schools, but you know, I wanted different teaching styles and to see how those would benefit my daughter. And to kind of compare and contrast, I think my daughter's a fast learner. She picks up things quickly, but my brother is dyslexic, and I watched him struggle through school the entire time that he was in school, and he hasn't really excelled in a higher education setting because of all the problems that he had with standardized testing and going through school. And I see Montessori education, which is not, I mean, it's not like they're teaching, you know, different content, but the style of teaching is different. It's very conceptual, it's very hands-on, and it's geared for a different type of learner, and it allows children to both learn in a different way and give the information back to the teacher in a different way. Everything's not a written test. Some of the tests are allowed to be taken orally, or you know, using hands. Children can demonstrate the material back. And I just think, you know, anecdotally for my brother, if he had been able to take his tests like that to demonstrate the material back without having to do a written test, he would have excelled in so many areas. And so I just bring this up to let the this group know that I'm not an expert in any of these things. Like I said, I'm just a mom and just, you know, have my own experience to go with, and, you know, why I sought out some of the things that I did and what I've seen, you know, in my small niche. But I know I'm on the board also at Providence Montessori, and I can connect us with experts in that arena also, if we want to start to look at ways that we could mirror different learning styles and testing styles and more into the mainstream experience, so that we give our minority students who learn in a different way, who express themselves in a different way, more of an opportunity to excel in a public school setting.
So you are not just a mom, you're a wealth of information. So please, and a lot of it's because you're a mom. So understand that.
Well, I mean, I don't have any, I guess what I meant to say is I don't have any educational expertise. I just, you know, I have life experience, and I have experience with, you know, being on boards at some of these places, but I'm not a teacher and I don't have the educational background. So I don't want to step in like, you know, I know all this stuff and I'm here to tell you guys. I have seen a lot of interesting things that I would love to share with the group is what I humbly submit to you all.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for that. And it looks like we're just about time where Jennifer's going to jump off and go get married. But before you leave, Jennifer, the group has also been talking a lot about implicit bias in the classrooms. And can you speak on the curriculum at the University of Kentucky? Is that a part of the curriculum, or what can you say about that and the role that you believe that it plays in educating children?
Well, I mean, it's definitely part of our curriculum and training our teachers. I mean, you know, I think that's, I mean, it's been part of our, I mean, it's been something that, you know, they've actually been doing professional development with us as faculty, you know, to deal with those issues. But, you know, it's definitely something that, you know, in our courses around curriculum, in our courses around guidance and discipline, in our courses around just issues in early childhood education, you know, we are including information about that, and supporting our students to, you know, to recognize, you know, those biases that they have that they oftentimes do not think that they do have. So, I mean, it's something we take very seriously, and it, you know, and it's really about, you know, you know, trying to train our teachers at our level, training our teachers, you know, on how to think about issues of bias.
And Dr. Brown, are you working with Christia Brown? Dr. Christia Brown, that's we started a partnership about 2 weeks ago, exploring how we can help UK Center for Equity and Social Justice build greater competencies in the area of implicit and explicit bias, racism, so that those teachers coming out of the teacher ed program, when they come to our classrooms, have had some level of intense not just pedagogy and methodology, but experience. And so what we talk about is how can we put some of those teachers who come from polarized or homogeneous environments into these urban settings where they're first time meeting students that don't look like them or haven't had experiences like them is not their first time when they take a job. And so we started, we're working on a model right now with Dr. Brown, and I forget the other professor, Dr. Kornblaw, that's also in that center around this conversation.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that work. We do have a new center in our college on Center of Civil Rights, that we're trying, we're certainly trying to partner with. But to speak to your concern or your suggestion about placing students, one of the things I actually do the practicum experience for our seniors before they start student teaching, and one of the things that I have intentionally done is placed our students in our high minority, low performing schools in the city. Sadly, I've had some bad experiences there, just in terms of the teachers that are working there not being good supervisors, and I've had some really bad experiences with that, I'm sorry to say, but that's something that we're just very, very committed to in our teacher education program, is to make sure that, because we do have, as I mentioned, it is primarily all white females that we're training right now. And so, we want them, out there, getting some of those experiences with children, from different backgrounds, for sure.
Erin, it looks like you would like to make a comment or question.
I do. It's a comment with a question. So, I totally agree that there needs to be a lot of work done around implicit bias, explicit bias, as well as cultural competency. For any teacher and educator, you understand that it's a lifelong journey that you never really arrive to. However, I also feel like that there needs to be conversation too on what our education standards are, and are those educational standards culturally inclusive, and are we teaching to that? So what I mean by that, if you look at any US history textbook, is it really being taught, from a multi-cultural perspective, taking into consideration the true realities that happened here, and looking at indigenous perspectives, African-American and Black perspectives, Latinx perspectives, and you can apply those same questions to pretty much any subject matter. So I applaud that there's efforts going, into making sure the predominantly white female student population is really educated or beginning their educational journey on implicit bias. But it goes beyond that into how they prepare their lessons and the activities that they include in the materials that they're integrating into the classroom. If a student of color doesn't see themselves in the curriculum, where can they attach to, and then how can they create a vision for themselves within our community? So I would
Well,
say,
in early childhood, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just going to say, in early childhood, of course, we don't teach, historical content and that sort of thing. And I think Sharon will agree with me that, we have, because of the fact that we have a rating system for our programs in early childhood, one of the variables that is very specifically monitored in our early childhood settings are issues of diversity, and ensuring that lessons, ensuring that materials in the classroom, ensuring that interactions between teachers, those are variables that, that are monitored, if you will, so we probably do a better job than based on what I've observed in elementary schools, because I don't go beyond kindergarten, but based on what I've seen in elementary schools, I think that in preschool, we probably do a better job of that than, in K-12 settings. I don't know if Sharon agrees with that or not.
Oh, I concur with that statement.
I don't know if I agree with y'all, but no, I'm just kidding.
I agree with that. But before you leave, let me ask you one final question. Of all of the conversation that you've heard today and the things that we've talked about, what have we missed when we're talking about addressing a system that is a barrier for minority students in education. What do you think that we have missed that we should be thinking about, that we should be including, or possibly making recommendations that you already, have somewhere in your mind that you think that we've missed, Jennifer?
Well, I don't, I don't know if this, I don't know that this necessarily is a race issue, but one of the things that I just would encourage you to spend a lot of time thinking about are the issues around childhood trauma. And, in your, I mean, I am just so convinced that part of the gap, the educational gap that we're seeing in schools, after I did a very, very intense study of this with my graduate schools in the spring, it stems from the adverse child experiences and the traumatic experiences that young children are living with. And because their brains are malleable at this age, and because, and we do see those more in low income communities, not necessarily just in low income communities, but certainly we see them not. And so trying to ensure that in educational structures, we are considering that. And the reason I think that has such implication right now is that I have a very, very strong concern that when we go back to school full time, or whatever that's going to look like, whether it's preschool, and this can happen in preschool as much as it can in K-12, that we're going to spend so much time trying to beat in academics to children to try to make up for the gap that has occurred while children were out of school, that we're going to neglect the fact that many of our children have spent the last several months at home in traumatic situations that have exacerbated their inability to be able to learn. And that really breaks my heart. And I just think it's just something, and I don't know, that doesn't come in the form of some kind of recommendation, but I just think that it has to be. I just want to say to all teachers out there, love on these kids really, really hard for the first several months that you're back with them, because we don't know what they've been going through. There's so many of our children that have not been reached over the last several months, and we don't know what they've been going through. And so I'm sorry.
And so before you leave, you'd probably be glad to know that we just purchased a social emotional curriculum for the district. And these past 3 days have been talking about exactly what you mentioned, ensuring that our students' needs are met from a social emotional standpoint before you start talking about academics, and more so as it relates to trauma and mental health that's many of them have endured. So I do appreciate your sentiments there. And we have, again, been intentional about ensuring that we rolled out a social emotional curriculum so that our teachers
What curriculum, you guys?
I'll have to look in my notes what those two are. And it's different from grade level. High school curriculum is different from the elementary and middle. So I'll get you that curriculum notes. And can I make a final comment as it relates to Aaron's point around curriculum alone? When we talk about policy, you all that have been in Kentucky since 1990 know that CARA gave schools decentralization and authority to determine curriculum in schools. And so school districts don't determine what curriculum is actually pushed through classrooms or into school buildings. That's determined building by building by building. However, we purchased a guaranteed and viable curriculum 2 years ago, $6 million that we offered to every one of our schools. And that was to create some uniformity, to ensuring that some standard was in place, that kids were getting a similar curriculum. But even further, we're now unpacking that even more because we want to make sure it's culturally competent. I was looking at a study of children's literature published in 2015 that said that 73% of books had a main character in it who were typically white. 12.5 of those featured a talking truck or an animal, while 7.6 of those featured an African American. Think about that. And those are books that are published not by us, if you understand the story, the history is usually told from the conqueror, not from the conquered. We don't get to determine whether or not we're in those books. And so what we have to look at is who's publishing, and that typically comes out of Texas, and why are they publishing? And so why are they being exclusive instead of inclusive? And to that point around that curriculum, are there statutes in place that continue to exacerbate the ability for schools to teach what they want to and not what's needed? And that's that's based on CARA, that decentralized that type of authority being pushed from the district and into school buildings.
Jennifer, on behalf of the committee, we would like to thank you for taking your time out to provide your level of expertise. It's been, phenomenal. Thank you for joining us today.
All right. Thank you all so much. It was my honor.
Thank you.
Let me know if I can be of further assistance.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Anthony, it looks like I have exceeded the time for the education today, but I think that it was a lot of good conversation. It'll give us an opportunity to go back and look at our chart and maybe make some recommendations or tweak the ones that we were thinking about. I think Jennifer provided us with a lot of information and guidance to think about when we were going back and deciding what is going to be one of the priorities, the top 3 priorities that we submit to the chairs as recommendations. But Anthony, with no further ado, and in respect to everybody's time on this Friday evening or afternoon, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you so we can talk about the economic opportunity portion.
Well, let me just say this. In light of our document that we produced, while we still have you on the floor, do you want to go through the education? Is there any comments that anyone would like to make on the items that we've identified? And in particular, the idea behind our assignment of individuals in particular areas. Many of those assignments came from clearly the fact that you brought the issue, which means it's a hot button issue for you. And if that's the case, no better person to help us shepherd making sure that we get through to an answer on each one of those. But Sharon, you might want to just
okay. Yes, I just didn't want to be a hog of time.
No, I understand. No,
economic.
I hogged it last week. This is Go ahead,
yes,
Patrice.
I wanted to ask Anthony, when you opened the call, you talked about the conversation you had with the co-chairs about the top 3 or something. Could you give us a little more on that so we get clear about how we're making this selection?
No, it's a great question. I think it's still being formulated because ultimately that came from the question that many of us as vice chairs ask when we talk about what is the final product that we are going to deliver to them and what format should it be in. And just trying to distill down, you think about the number of things that we've already identified in our conversation. There is so much in each one of these topics that could be addressed and really needs to be dealt with. What we did in that meeting is really presented to them the document that we've given to you all to indicate that there's a lot of stuff here that needs to be not only identified, but followed up on and tracked to completion. How are we going to do that? So I wish I could give you more detail on how we make that selection of those top 3. We're going to continue to talk with the chairs to make sure we get it as quickly as it comes down to them. But right now, it seems like in order to have the best package to be delivered up to be kind of dealt with by council, for example, not to have an entire, it'd just be too wieldy, but maybe having the top 3 that we can maybe take action on right away. Dr. Smith even mentioned the idea of going in phases, phase 1, 2, and 3. So maybe the top 3 come out of phase 1, which could be dealt with immediately, but there's several other issues that need to go in other phases. Yes, Daryl.
And to that point, you talked about actions. What my question becomes, if the mayor's office has authority over certain spaces in this structure. And so if we're making recommendations that the mayor actually does not even control, is that a good recommendation? And I say that to say, we conflate all of this stuff around what drove us here, which is, again, I'll return us back to racism,
Racism, yeah.
discrimination, implicit bias, social justice. So the mayor is not going to solve issues at Transylvania University if we say Transylvania University it's recommended that they do this. The mayor's office doesn't budget for Transylvania. The mayor's office doesn't budget for Fayette County Public Schools, nor they provide those resources, nor do they even participate in the strategic plan that the board develops and drafts with the superintendent. So my question is, as we develop these priorities, we need to make sure that these priorities point back to a place to those individuals who have a responsibility for making change happen in them. And I think it's would be disingenuous of us to make recommendations to a body or a governing body that this group, this commission actually has no control of asking them to do. For instance, we can make recommendations to the State Department because of the collective impact that they have on changing policy and recommendations. But to say, changing the kindergarten brigance readiness outcomes next year for Fayette County Public Schools, I don't know if that doesn't get into racism. We've allowed that mission to be conflated into something else and did not address racism. And I don't want the community to say, well, I told you so. That group was really just there to pacify and create a passive message around racism and didn't do nothing,
Excellent point. And I could not agree with you more. So when you think about the fact that the city's role is policy and legislation, clearly we need to look at things that could impact that the city can decide upon. I also think, though, that to take advantage of the opportunity where we now have energy that has brought us together, understanding the disparities that have affected us as African Americans and or people of color, then why not also identify those things that even if they may touch another organization or another area, the city would have no power in influencing the way that it happened. But it sure is important to make sure that people who've all said that they want to be supportive of where we are, recognize that and see if they can do something in their own house about that. There's something that we saw on the economic development piece that we'll hear more about. We don't have anything to do with model procurement code. That is clearly a state function, but it has risen up from the conversation in the community. And so I think it would be, we have not done our job if we're not listening to what the community is also saying in terms of being issues that need to be discussed. So I think that everything has value as we bring it forward. It may or may not be something that the city can implement, but now that we've all come together and the community now understands that this has been brought out as an issue, then the community goes with us to the other organization that may have the responsibility of implementing. Does that make sense?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yes, Reggie.
I would say I understand Daryl's point, and I can see the validity in his point. It does have merit to say that we shouldn't make recommendations for which the ultimate decision maker has no control over. However, I guess I would disagree with what I think we should do. I would disagree with the solution Daryl's proposing, because here's where we are. The number one employer in Lexington today are educational communities. University of Kentucky, Fayette County Public Schools, they employ more people and impact the livelihoods of more people than any other single employment sector in this county.
Yes.
And so knowing that and knowing where most of people's bread and butter comes from, I think we would be remiss and really failing to do our jobs if we didn't talk about education and make recommendations about education to the mayor. I just think that would be a failure of our job. And particularly since the mayor certainly made education one of her 5 subcommittees to come back with recommendations for. And so I would say if I had to choose or vote on whether we make recommendations that might impact the Fayette County Public Schools or might impact the University of Kentucky, I would say that we should make those recommendations. And then the mayor can take those to those entities and says, here's what the citizens of Lexington would like to see you do. That's where I might be outvoted on that, but that's where I would come down and vote.
And Senator Thomas, just for a point of clarity, I was not suggesting that we not make any recommendations. I just wanted to make sure that we were cognizant of the responsibility for this commission rose up through the tension of the mayor's office. No more if it would have rose to the doorsteps of our central office. Our Board of Education and superintendent would have addressed it like they have historically, the issue on our doorsteps. And this rose up on the doorsteps of the mayor's office. So I was not by any means saying that we should not make educationally based recommendations. What I am saying is that we certainly need to make sure the person responsible for running this city gets the attention and is able to make actions and recommendations as you suggested to those organizations that are impacted in the city.
And go ahead.
Go ahead, Patrice.
And the last thing I wanted to mention also was that I don't know if we were able to collect that data or if that was something that we asked for about the amount of money spent on education by Fayette County Public Schools for us to see if we've got a budget to make sorts of recommendations with spending if that information came.
And just to piggyback off both comments, this is Rochelle Dodson. I think that, yeah, it's definitely important to stay focused and to make recommendations that are actionable, but I think there's always room for different parts of different bodies to act together. Like if we made a recommendation that impacted University of Kentucky, maybe the city would have an opportunity to partner with UK on a project or to devote funds to something that's already in existence there through city funds. So I don't think we should steer away from things. I think we should identify our priorities and our solutions and then find ways to make them our city's problem or our city's issue.
Yes.
Agreed.
And identifying partners that maybe we don't have the money for or the facilities for that somebody can help us with.
That's right. Excellent. Go ahead, Councilmember Mark.
So, I really appreciate what Mr. Thompson said. I was about to chime in and say the same thing, that I really like to see the recommendations. I think they'd be most effective if they're focused on things the city can actually do, but you can't talk about education without putting it in the larger context of state and school board. And I think this is an opportunity to really help educate me and my fellow council members on what's systemic about systemic racism, that this problem weaves through all these different jurisdictions, and the city may be able to do this one little piece, but it would be amplified if we could also work together with the Fayette County School Board and urge our state legislators to make some changes. So it's sort of an opportunity to use education to educate people about what systemic racism is.
Agreed.
Rochelle, did I see your hand? Okay. I agree, Mark. I think we've come around to it now, and I think this has been good discussion because I guarantee you there are people in the community wondering the same thing. They're saying the same things they're asking the same questions of neighbors and friends and family about, well, what are they doing? How's that going to impact? It is so important for us to, there was a comment made about never wasting a crisis. This is an opportunity where we've got a lot of attention on what needs to be done to correct and address and right maybe even some wrongs done toward people of color for a very, very long time. Now, are we going to have things that come up that can't be simply solved in 60 days? Absolutely. But the value in this conversation is now everybody is now brought into it. The community is now listening to what's going on. And now's the opportunity to share those things, those even anecdotal experiences that would get us to a point where we can have everyone appreciate how each and every one of these areas has been affected in our lives due to racial issues and racism. So I'm sorry, Sharon, go right ahead.
Well, look, I'm just eating into your time. I'm gonna take us back to the chart
Okay,
and just go through it really quickly to
really?
make sure that everybody, I'll talk about some of the things that have been added into the chart that we sent to you. They are highlighted in yellow, so we'll go through that. Patrice, with we have one of your items of responsibility as a team lead is going to be on outcome 1, which is increasing the duration of time for preschool children. And it looks like from the conversation today, we'll have to go back in and maybe rework some of that and, you know, think about that in a different way. But I'm certainly willing to work with you. And so all of you guys that have been given the responsibility of being a team lead, just know that it's not, we're not expecting, Anthony and I are not expecting you guys to work on this by yourself. We're gonna be here to support you, but we just kind of need somebody who is going to be willing to run point on that to make sure that we can get the ball moving down the court and keep it moving until we have a recommendation that we want to submit. And then outcome 2 and the whole family approach, Daryl, you were absent. And so Anthony and
You
I
gotta sign something.
And Darren and Aaron are gonna team up on that item. And then outcome 3, ensure, I kind of tweaked this one a little bit from some of the input that I received from some of you guys. And to ensure an educational community that is inclusive culturally and linguistically. And so we added here, increasing the number of Black teachers and other minority teachers, including men, that are hired district-wide. And so
can I, because we
Yes.
wouldn't in our own space just say Black teachers because it's not inclusive. So we would talk about educator diversity and inclusion that ensures a cross section of all of our minorities. And minorities leaves out Asians, it leaves out Hispanics. I mean,
Yes.
so we can't
give me your
use that.
verbiage again, Daryl. Give me your verbiage.
Yeah, we just can't use it. We just increase the number of minority and diverse teachers, including males, and not just take the Black off of it.
Got it.
And so, let me see, I know I was asking, so y'all assign me some more stuff here.
So outcome 3 is Aaron is running team lead on that one. And so we were asked to add as a goal to increase the number of teachers who speak multiple languages. And we can refine the verbiage and all of this, you know, at a later date. And then to implement a curriculum and teaching practices that are culturally inclusive and rooted in ethnic study practices. And so all of that is highlighted is included. And then another thought out there that came to the chart was to create a school board system of sorts that includes representation from the community when a minority group is not elected to the board, and what that could look like. So we're gonna need to have some additional conversation about that. So
those are statutory changes that are in statute and regulation that basically says that the community from those that those seats represent actually elect and choose those people. So that's going to be a heavy lift.
One of the things that they're talking about is not necessarily changing that statute, but maybe having a non-voting member or ambassador or an honorary. For example, say that you have elections and you have a minority group that is left there that has no representation, but determining a certain community percentage, I guess, of the population that fits into that group, and then selecting someone to have a voice, even if they wouldn't have a vote on the school board, but to be able to be there and be at the table intentionally. Well, we understand that everybody, you know, the school board meetings are open to the public, but to have a representation, representative that is specifically, you know, representing that certain group. So,
and we already have that structure in place. Every month at both our meetings, we have both a student, a parent and a classified member that it intentionally includes minorities. So again, I don't want us to have to go duplicate work, but that's the structure that's been in place in our system, as well as the Equity Council, which is probably the only standing committee other than Jefferson just started one. We've had that for 20 years, 20, 30 years in Fayette. That's a standing committee to the board that makes up a equity population of the community. So again, some of those could go away because those structures are in place just through conversation.
Okay.
Reggie?
So Aaron, it looks like offline.
Sharon, Reggie
might-
had something.
Oh, I'm
Reggie
sorry.
had something connected to this last.
No, I'll be glad to defer to Aaron and then I'll
Okay.
come to her.
Oh, I was just gonna say, it looks like some additional conversation, Aaron, with Daryl would be beneficial in helping to address that.
Absolutely.
I had something to that point,
Yes.
that with respect to what Brother Daryl was saying about some systems that are already in place. I've been watching a lot of the other subcommittee meetings. I don't know if anyone else has. And that Anthony, you was like kind of like must see.
Yeah, we watching that. Yeah, but it's what we need to do.
It's like must see TV. Everybody wants to see what these other committees are doing, like what's happening over there. And something that really stuck out to me yesterday was the conversation in law enforcement one. Dr. Melinda Price talked about normalization, that so often we fall back onto this is normally what we do. This is the system that's already in place. And we are being charged to disrupt the system. And with respect to you, Brother Daryl, you saying that there are some things that are already in place. I don't want us to lose the spirit of the recommendation to see if there's something different that can be done to disrupt the system, because what we have in place has not affected the achievement gap, and it hasn't dismantled this. It may have done some dismantling of the racism, but the outcome has not changed. So, and that's, like I say, I'm not saying it hasn't changed, a point here, a point there. Let's don't get caught on that part. But I'm saying that I just want us to keep in mind that we're really going for something big here, something that feels different, and the spirit of it being different. So maybe we can find a way to retool some of these suggestions that they fit, but I just don't want us to eliminate things in conversation.
That's great. And those one of those conversations we have off of this recorded public meeting, because again, I work inside the system. I know where all the dead bodies are buried. So if we really need to get it done to make an impact, I mean, I am the disruptor when it comes to this work in our system. Believe me, I don't get Christmas stars, happy birthday, none of that.
Senator Thomas.
Yeah, I appreciate Patricia's point, and I think it just really highlights the important conversation that Daryl started. The mayor put 2 state legislators on this commission for a reason. And she did that because she recognized that some of the recommendations that would come forward from the overall commission and from the subcommittees would require state policy changes. Recommendations that would have to go to the state legislature to be implemented. So we should not be afraid, going back to Patricia's point, that we may come up with recommendations. I think the mayor fully expects and anticipates that we will come up with recommendations that will have to go back to the Kentucky General Assembly for enactment and change.
Excellent. Agreed.
Okay, so moving on along. Sister Patrice, it looks like it's gonna be you and I teaming up on outcome 4, recruiting minority students for gifted and talented programs and working through that process. Outcome 5, creating meaningful after-school opportunities for you. Marcus, you got that one. You're the team lead on that one.
We got that through everything that you said last week. It just came on through your pores. So we had to assign that one to you.
He had a lot of passion for that. So we wanted to use his passion and put it to good work. Outcome 6, this is that HANDS program, partnering with community-based programs to support pregnant women to increase healthy development prior to birth. We have Dr. Harris listed here. And so we may need someone else to help out with this one. I'm not sure if he's on vacation or what's going on there. So we may be looking from support from another committee member. Outcome 7, equitable distribution of funding for schools that are located in high asset neighborhoods. And overall, Daryl, when you're absent, there you go.
The question really is, what are the deliverables that you're asking for from these outcomes? I mean, because there's a lot we can provide, and then there could be more that you all could really make recommendations on how to improve. So what are the expected deliverables?
Those are all of the things that we're trying to work through right now, Daryl. So
Okay.
with that topic, all of these topics are wide open.
Yeah, we've got the Promise Neighborhood work with William Wells Brown, easy peasy stuff that we've been doing. So I'll bring what I got.
Yeah, that's wide open. And then exploring the attrition rates, Marcus, that was a hot topic for you when you asked about the attrition rate of minority students during their first year of college. So we've got you running point on that one. And then what we have two things. Well, that is the two things. But the second thing in the developing outcome is that COVID-19 education gap that we're all worried about. Dr. Jennifer Grisham Brown discussed her concern with the social and emotional component of that for children. And so Senator Thomas, Patrice, and we're gonna need to have a guest from KDE or another professional to come in and provide some information about that. So we're gonna have you guys work together on that topic as well.
What outcome was that, Sharon?
That is surrounding that education gap due to COVID-19 that we're all concerned about. I think you said last week that it was anticipated at 10 to 12%.
Yeah, what I said, and I know the people listening, that when Interim Commissioner Kevin Brown testified for the Education Committee during the month of June, he anticipated a 10 to 12% increase in the achievement gap going into the 2021 school year, which means Fayette County, and Fayette County should know this right now. The Fayette County achievement gap right now between whites and blacks is 46%. If that's going to hold, that means that we're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 56 to 58% achievement gap. That means that blacks would be learning at less than half of the rate whites here in Fayette County. I mean, that is beyond alarming. That is beyond alarming. So that's why this issue needs to be given extreme attention, because the achievement gap is widening in the state, not lessening.
And so, Senator Thomas, I hate to sound like I'm rebutting anything, but that's a broad brush that we're painting that gap with, because you're talking across K through 12, that gap. And again, measuring whether or not that gap exists when you get there, or whether or not you're reducing the gap once they get there. So, controlling the narrative is one thing, but being really clear about what the data says is another. So I think as you look to unpack that language, that we either do it through some level of disaggregation that speaks clearly to what that gap is prior to kids getting there, once they get there, and then across those grade levels. And we have data to help support you in that work.
Sharon, I wanted to ask about, because Senator Thomas, when he asked what point that was, I had to dig back through the emails to find this document about the outcomes. Could we institute a Google Drive of some kind so that all the information is there, because emails are rough?
That is actually one of the things that came up in our conversation with the co-chairs yesterday, is that there needs to be a Google Drive of some sort that's a repository of all this information and data that we're all going to be pulling. So we'll be finding that out. I don't know what it is yet, but yes, your point is very well taken.
I will try to get that in order as soon as I can, because Anthony and I were even trying to find the statement that he's required about, the meeting being a virtual meeting, and we were trying to find that this morning. So I understand. Point well taken.
Is that something I don't know if Sharita does, but I don't, because Google is open source, but I don't know if there was something more private that we had through through LFUCG or anything like that.
That's been a topic of discussion with the core team. I would have to get back with you on that, whether or not a Google Drive can be created or not.
Or some sort of repository for all the information. Right now, we're all just doing our best to keep up with it, but there's going to be more and more information coming at us. So
right, I can get clarification and get back with the vice chairs on that, Anthony and Sharon.
Yeah, Anthony and Sharon, just quickly, I'm working with. You said there were 3 people. I'm working with Patrice, and who was the 3rd person on the achievement gap issue?
We have you and Patrice, but we just have a note that we wanted to bring in a guest to cover that topic.
Okay, just the 2 of us. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, Anthony,
okay.
I'm gonna pivot to you.
Sure. So before
now that you have 20 minutes.
I'm just going to run through the outcomes here so people can actually see and voice any concerns with assignments that they may have. But Bishop is going to be on here quite a bit just because of the nature of his work. And one of the big things is clearly the first outcome number 1, increase the amount of spend with MBEs. It is absolutely critical that we do better at that. And I know that there have been things put in place because I helped put some of them in place years ago. But all of us know that there are things that can be done to improve what we have. And the first thing we want to get it is that ordinance that enables the goal of 10% and move that to 15. We've heard that very clearly from the community. People want to see that happen. But understand that it's not just as simple as raising the number up 5 points. You have to have the businesses that actually can do the work and where the city spends the money. So there's going to be a lot of data that we need to look into. And next week, I'll just say this, our guests will be focused on the economy next week. Allison Davis from the University of Kentucky will be here. And we'll be talking about a lot of things that make up our economy, the growth areas of our economy. No point in us trying to continue to do work and jobs and employment in areas that may or not be growth areas. Let's go toward the growth areas. So she's going to have a lot of information to share. And I think even some of that will deal with what you're looking at, Marcus, and just tracking students and where they are and going through college. So she's even got data on that. But the point being that there's several other bullet points here that we have to address in order to make that happen. We've got to make sure that we have MBEs in our community that have the capacity, the ability to scale, and to actually perform the work that's let by the city. So there's got to be some work done on identifying where is the city putting out money, what are they buying, and make sure that we're in those categories so we can increase the percentage. Of course, me and Bishop
Anthony,
are going to work.
Where is that? I'm missing that, where we're saying what you just said about where's the city spending. I don't see that on here.
Yeah, it's there. The first one doesn't cover it, but let's see.
It kind of does. In outcome 1 under bullet 2, increase the goal identified in the ordinance from 10 to 15. The first bullet point under that is recognize that there need to be MBA with capability to supply what the city spends money on.
Right, there it is. I knew I had it in there. Thank you.
But I also want to look at, we talked about getting that information about what the city is spending money on, what the city is purchasing. So I saw that as part of one of the outcomes.
It is.
But it, I know we're moving fast, but with this, I feel like somehow I'm not seeing a couple of things that we brought up. And that's why I just want to pause just a little bit, if you all could bear with me. I'm trying to find the one that has something to do with how much the city is spending in particular areas. Oh, well, really like outcome 4, where you said encourage MBE development in the growing areas of our local economy. I also want to talk about the existing areas of our local economy, the existing areas of LFUCG spending.
Right.
That, again, we talked about some businesses could be nimble enough to move into that area if we knew that's where the big purchases. If the city's buying, half of their budget is spent on ink pens, I need to
Right.
get in the ink pen business. That's what I'm saying. Like, do we have that reflected anywhere in here?
Yeah, I know that that sentiment is certainly here, but as you say, we're moving fast.
So I'll keep that in mind, and if not, where can we?
And I know
Michelle?
that information has been requested directly of you and also of Bishop. So Sharita's got the point to pull it, and we will have that data submitted.
That second bullet point where we were just at, the first one was recognize that there need to be MBA with capability to support what the city spends money on. The next point after that is provide data for review / analysis on spend with MBEs for all those that make purchases within LFUCG. And maybe we just broaden that a little bit to, like, because we want the data on spend with MBAs, but we want the data on spend, period.
Yeah.
So maybe we just make either a separate point or expand that point a little bit so that we get more general data on what the city's spending on, and then what it's spending, you know, what the options are for MBEs, I'm sorry. And I don't know, maybe that we just work that into that point, because I think that point starts with it, but maybe doesn't go as far as we want it to.
Sure. I think it's a great recommendation. And again, I know that it's been asked from a couple of different people, and I know Sharita's already seen the request come through. So we will.
So one extra bullet would be great for me to know that it's actually in there. I want to make sure it's, you know, that it's written down.
Okay. We'll put that, we'll add a bullet in there.
Yeah.
Okay. The second outcome deals with the prime contractors that are utilizing MBEs, and of course, what we're trying to make sure they do is that MBEs are contacted on these projects. And I know Sharita's done a lot of work on that, and I know Fayette County Public Schools does that too. But we got to make sure that you know, MBEs are given the opportunity to participate, even as a subprime, subcontractor, or prime, depending upon how big they are. But certainly that we may create some incentives. I think we need to look at that. Is there ways that we can give some incentives and reward those who actually do a good job of utilizing MBEs on projects? I know Sharita dealt with a number of times. You know, people say they're going to use one when it's time for the RFP, and they submit the RFP and they get selected, and all of a sudden the MBE doesn't get contacted. And I know we've done a lot better over the years. I'm just saying that has been an issue in the past. What can we do to make sure that does not happen in the future? So that's what we're talking about.
Anthony, to that point, this one is very specific to construction, it feels to me, in the language, that I would also like to see if we could find a way to, when we're talking about overall spending of purchasing, not just construction, to also make sure that we are doing some sort of incentive or strengthening the language for divisions within LFUCG to use minorities in their purchasing. Like we talk about art projects, we talk about food service, we talk about flowers and whatnot. Can we add to that, or should that be separate? I don't want to dilute your point. Is that one that could be expanded, or do we need a separate outcome for that?
I think we'll create a separate one, just so, like you say, it does bring it to the level of importance. Understand though, if we come out of here with our top three, there will be some collapsing, right? So if I can get the same thing done in one outcome, then that's a good thing for us to be able to submit to make sure it gets in phase one.
And Anthony, to that point, I think you mentioned the Model Procurement Code 45A earlier.
Yeah.
And that code really, as much as it's probably a oxymoron calling it a model,
right,
is really the barrier that municipalities and school districts operate from when it comes to letting these contracts. And that's across all spends, from services to personal service contracts to construction. So that being said, you may want to just move that piece of the discussion around the model procurement code into this same focus area outcome, but not address it in another area.
I addressed it separately because I agree this is one of those that it has so much importance for us to get where we need to be. But I also know that this is a state function, and you know, I've got Senator Thomas pegged to be the one to be the bird dog on this. So,
but you know, the city operates and the school district operates off of those state statutes, so it's not just
Sure.
the state. So we're bound by those provisions. So if we can't do incentives using taxpayer dollars to award a contract, we can't choose a company based on them being minority, because it's typically just a low bid that's set up in the code. So I mean, all those things come from the same statute that might need to be looked at, that drive our policy.
Sharita, are we in Lexington model procurement or advertising statute? I thought we were advertising statute.
The city of Lexington, we've adopted certain portions of the Kentucky Model Procurement Code.
Certain portions.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
And-
there's also
that
advertising
language-
statute.
And that
Which we-
language is actually in our bid and proposal template.
Okay.
Correct.
So you're suggesting that we put that under,
That it's at least parallel. You don't have to change it, but I mean, it's going to be a parallel discussion every time you go to that
right?
issue.
Okay.
And
Well-
Sharita, you used the word adopt, and I'm back to the normalization of things. So is this something that we adopted and it's an actual ordinance? Is it codified, or are we just doing this thing? You know, like this is just what we've been doing. You know, is there anything written that says we are using this statute versus advertising, et cetera?
Yes, it's an ordinance. It's a resolution.
I don't know what that means. You said an ordinance, a resolution. Is that the
That's
same
city
thing?
Laws, resolutions. The city adopts resolution, which becomes ordinance. Councilman members, Mark
But yeah,
Swanson can
It is force of
elaborate on
law.
that.
Yeah, that's what we vote on. We either vote on ordinance or resolutions. I haven't yet to figure out what the difference between the two is.
Okay.
But when we vote on something, that's what it is. So, while I-
Maybe we bring that, you know, we make sure we provide that to the committee so that everybody sees that language and where it articulates in our procurement process as to what method of procurement that we're using and when. Mark, go ahead.
I'm a little unclear on the difference between outcome 9 and outcome 2. It may just be I'm not that familiar with the terminology, but they seem to me to be addressing pretty much the same issue.
It's just trying to take advantage of the fact that we recognize that opportunity zones are definitely a point of interest. And what can we do to make sure that anybody who might want to capitalize on doing a project in an opportunity zone, how do we make sure that we create the incentive that they work with MBEs in the process? Okay, it's just pointing out the specific area that's going to be the area of focus for development and projects rather than an overall encompassing approach from prime contractors. Okay.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It's what jumped out at me is this idea of incentives and
Yep.
possibility of using the tax code and things like that. I spent some time sort of brainstorming about what different levers we have in city
Exactly.
policy
good.
to work with, and that's something I'm going to do my own homework on. But
Yeah. And it could very well be two different things, right? You do prime contractors on projects, for example, and trying to give an incentive for them to work with MBEs in their securing of a project could be very different from the different folks who might be doing work in a opportunity zone. It may or may not even involve construction with prime contractors. It may be a business that's going in there, but is there an incentive for that business to be able to do business with MBEs? Can we create that?
Okay.
So they are slightly different. They both look at the tax code as an opportunity for changing behavior, modifying behavior. and maybe even rewarding for that change in behavior. But it's identifying those two different reasons for why you might want to use a similar tool.
Okay, thanks.
Can I ask then that if we're going to keep outcome 2 as is, if we added an outcome 13 that mirrored the language but changed prime contractors to departments and divisions, so ensure that departments and divisions utilizing MBEs where at all possible, for purchases, and then strengthen language in purchasing, realizing that there'll be follow-up to audit compliance within, for each division, and also develop incentives for
Right.
departments and divisions to achieve and exceed the stated goal.
And so quick question on what I took Patrice's point there. Is it intentional that we left off women and veterans and are being exclusively focused on minorities?
So yes, and the reason is because we are dealing with racial disparities. And so I don't want that to get diluted with the other disadvantaged businesses that we would be looking at. Because one of the things that we've even talked about is back up in bullet 1, outcome 1, where we talk about the ordinance, it just says DBE. There may be some real reason to separate out DBE into MBE, WBE, veteran-owned business, so that we can track better its performance to that 15% goal, rather than just to a category that includes them all.
And
So
Daryl, this also speaks to the Herald Leader article that that our reporting too has shown for more than 20 years, Lexington has done less than 1% with Black-owned business, minority-owned business, that they may reach 7, 8, 9%, which is probably the same thing at FCPS with that MWVB with the long acronym. But, I think we have to keep in mind, people aren't marching in the streets about women's issues. People aren't marching in the streets about veterans being racist, we've got racism, dealing with those issues. I think we're talking about race right now. So.
Yeah.
Understood. I appreciate that too. And I just want us to be prepared to address.
Yeah.
We have to be prepared to address that when you use the word equity across this commission. Someone else will punch a hole in it and say, well, what about this? Just like they said with Black Lives Matter, you want to counter that with All Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter. So we just have to be prepared to ensure that as we're making these outcomes, that we know what our why is, and that's our why. I appreciate that, Patrice.
Excellent. Yes, Reggie.
Yeah, I just want to third what Patrice said. I just want to join Daryl in saying I think Patrice it is ensuring that we maintain our focus here.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So that's why it specifically says MBE.
Understood.
Yep. Well, we've kind of bounced around. I'll leave it like this. Are there any questions about the others? Probably easier to do that. Yes, Rachel, Rochelle.
I wanted to ask a little bit about outcome 3 and 6. I kind of had the same question that our council member had about 2 and 9. They seem similar to me. Increase the amount of funding financing MBE received to start and expand businesses as outcome 3, and then outcome 6. Develop funding sources designed to assist MBE's ability to take their business to the next level. Find funding to help support their ability to attend trainings, and those seem similar to me. And so I wanted to ask what the difference between those was. And then I also wondered if we had any ability to back up from this a little bit to include individuals who may be wanting to solidify their own personal finances for the purpose of becoming business owners, or even just, increasing their financial literacy. Because I know that's something we touched on just a little bit in our introductions at the first meeting, but didn't really make it into an action item. And I say that only because I feel like this is a great list focused on business economic opportunity in Lexington, but we're not, I don't see individuals really in this list. And I don't know if that's because it's not really within our purview. Maybe it goes to a different committee, but I just feel like we're very focused on business and not as much focused on helping individuals level up in this.
It's a great
list.
point. Financial literacy is extremely important. We can add that. I don't know what we would be asking the city to do in that respect. Maybe.
I think there's opportunities for it in the same vein of these two outcomes to increase funding for individuals to receive training, for opportunities to, like I said, either expand their personal or business, eye toward business, financial literacy. I mean, I think there's already I've been trying to learn about them a little bit, but I think there's already some groups that sort of educate young people, and we're sort of the education and economic committee. So maybe we add, a piece where there's more financial stuff in the school.
I see your point. And to the point that we made in the earlier part of our conversation today is, even though it may not be something that the city would necessarily do, demonstrating that leadership that actually should go into the community, that it is recognized and handled in the community, is a good point. And so with that in mind, I agree. I will add a outcome that deals with financial literacy and education. And
So
to
Anthony,
answer your first question, let me answer her first question. The difference in 4 and 6 was, well, not 4.
3 and 6.
3 and 6. One deals with funding for expanding your business. For example, getting a loan, getting financing so that you might be able to expand your operation, expand your building, which allows you to do more productivity, whatever it might be. The other is very focused on training. So one is more of a training exercise versus a business expansion exercise. Both things can help you grow your business, right? But they have two different functions to get you there.
And maybe the training is the opportunity where we have to bring in individuals too, because I think that people, I don't know, maybe, because there may be people out there who, if they had a little bit more knowledge of, what programs, the city offers, or, that are out there, and maybe they had a grant or a funding opportunity to attend something like that, it would help propel them into business ownership.
Sure.
Yeah, I really want to endorse Rochelle's point. I think personal financial literacy is a really key thing. And I do think the city has some potential role to spearhead that. I wonder if we could combine 3 and...
I was going to recommend outcome number 2 under education.
But 3 and 6 could be combined basically to say, what is it we need to do? What can we do to assist businesses, minority-owned businesses, to expand and take advantage of market opportunities or city opportunities or something like that? And part of that is training, and part of that is capital investment.
Sure, that works.
Sarita, and you probably are familiar, because we've been doing it for years, the Small Business Administration training in partnership with the city, that where we provide some of that individual financial literacy. But again, I was looking at outcome number 2 that talks about the whole family. You could put a bullet under there to include financial literacy in that. And it's not just financial literacy for starting a business. It's really about economic empowerment, how to better utilize Absolutely. That. So you can fit that under education and add a bullet there potentially.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that works. We can do it in both places. Go ahead, Reggie. Reggie, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I have a question for Rochelle.
Okay.
Rochelle, when we've talked about financial literacy in the General Assembly, we typically think about that in 2 aspects. 1, teaching children how to balance checkbooks, and 2, teaching young people how to manage their credit and the importance of credit scores.
Mm-hmm.
I could be. I want to ask you this because I really like your opinion. On this economic development piece, I'm focused primarily on it as that is increasing the spend and making sure that we get our fair share of dollars. As a Black community, as an African American community, I need you to educate me because maybe I'm thinking too narrow. I could, we need to always expand our focus and our learning. Maybe I'm thinking too narrow, but help me in terms of how financial literacy works into the commission of this subcommittee.
Well, okay, so taking what you said, teaching young people how to balance a checkbook and use credit. I think that another important skill there is how to budget and live on a budget, and then kind of touching on what you said, improving your credit score using credit is also part of engaging in Lexington's business community. You're going out into the lending world to borrow, but you're not taking on debt that you can't service. You're learning to responsibly borrow, so that you can achieve your goals, so that you may start a business or buy a home. Because we all know that as the African Americans, we've historically been shut out of lending and home purchasing, and so maybe that helps to increase. I think it plays into really every aspect of life, because then you're affording your affordable housing opportunities increase, your wealth building and passing down for generational. So I really think it hits at the core of all the systemic racism issues when Blacks are better equipped to manage their own personal finances and pass that information down to their children and pass wealth down to their children, because that's historically what we've been shut out of. So I'm thinking of, the very things you said, basic skills, just in terms of managing a checkbook, getting on a budget, developing a budget, staying on it, and learning how to manage your money from an early age, because a lot of us just aren't taught that in our household. We're not taught how to manage money very responsibly, so that, when we get our first job, we know what to do with the money. We know how to figure out what we're going to have to pay for and plan for that. It's just, it's like, I would like to see programs that help people get off of a living paycheck to paycheck mentality and really getting into looking at more long-term opportunity for families, for, for business, expanding into business opportunities, but just also expanding the family experience as a whole. Does that make sense? Am I still being too broad? Do you want me to be more specific?
No, you've answered my question. That's all I was asking. You certainly answered my question.
I think it comes out of the work of this committee, because we are both education and economic outlook. And I do agree a lot with what Daryl said. Outcome number 2 being the whole family approach. It absolutely fits there. And as long as it comes forward, from this committee, whether we assign it under economic outlook or under education, the fact of the matter is we do talk about creating and passing on generational wealth.
Yeah.
Yes, Aaron.
To this conversation, I don't disagree with what anybody has said, but I think if we're talking about structural issues and what's holding people into poverty, it's also wages. So, when a family is the breadwinners are making the minimum wage or just even slightly above the minimum wage, how are they going to save when there's no dollars and cents to save? So I think that, if we're going to do this committee justice, we also need to be looking at, who wages, where are, in terms of breakdown in our local population, how many families of color are barely getting by because they're not receiving a living wage, and what can we do to increase the minimum wage in our community?
Excellent. We might hear some of that next week when Allison Davis presents to us. She's an economist from UK, but I do think it's important to make sure that information comes out. So I've got it noted, and I'll make sure that she talks about it next week. Yes, Mark.
So Anthony, one of the things that jumped out at me in last week's session that I don't see captured on this one, there's a reference to it in the education, is the whole issue of apprenticeships for skilled trades. And it's listed under kind of after school activities, which I don't think is quite the same thing.
No, I'm pretty sure I wrote something on that one. Where is that?
Oh, okay, it is there, outcome 12. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I just didn't read it closely enough. Great.
We are actually over time, aren't we, Sharon?
Yes, we are.
We all have such a good time when we get together talking about this. There's so many important issues that we bring up, and I do think that there's been another very rich discussion. I think a lot of information has been shared here today that's very beneficial. We have homework. We all know that there are things that we will work on together as a group to try to move forward. And Sharon, I'll turn it back over to you.
Again, I want to thank you guys, just as Anthony did. We have two very broad topics, but the great thing about this is we have a phenomenal group of people. You guys have been so wonderful in sharing your ideas and your comments, so I want to thank you for that. But I'm going to go ahead and take us through the remainder of the agenda. The next two meetings, the next one is scheduled for next Friday, and that's going to be July 24th at 1 p.m. And then July 31st at 1 p.m. Don't forget to mark your calendars for the meeting the town hall that Anthony talked about earlier, which is July 28th at 6:30.
Mm-hmm.
We want to make sure that all of our voices are heard there.
Will we get information on how to connect in with that one?
Yeah, as soon as we get it, we haven't gotten it either. I wanted to be able to announce that today, but I can't yet.
Okay.
But that information will be coming forward.
I'm sorry, what time was that on the 28th?
6:30.
6:30.
30.
And so if it seems like there's a little bit of a delay between with you guys getting the information and the links, it's because we're working through other people to get those. So it's just a timing thing.
Okay.
Okay.
Can I make a motion that if somebody's absent, they can't be assigned anything either?
Absolutely not. No. When somebody's absent, that's when you get double duty, sir.
Understand, Daryl, you aren't alone. Tyrone's name's on some of these things too.
I'm looking out for Tyrone too.
Yeah, he's already caught.
That's right. When you are absent, you get double duty. And Rachel, I'm going to be calling you and contacting you offline to see which item you would like to focus in on, because you had a bad connection at the last meeting. And
Yep.
so I'll contact you in a little bit to talk through that with you.
Well,
I'm open.
We'll put her on the whole family approach that deals with financial literacy.
I'm open. I mean, I tried to speak more today because I had a good connection and I wanted you guys to understand,
Yeah.
what areas I may be able to contribute to the group so that you guys can place me, but I'm really open to wherever you feel like. And I just want to say at this point, even though it's not necessarily a super public point, just so that you all remember this and hold me to this, on one of our outcomes on looking at disparities, like, where people drop out of college, where minority students drop out of college, I can get that information pretty easily from Transylvania University. Johnny Johnson, who's on a different subcommittee, is the director or the VP of diversity there. And he's presented that information to the Board of Regents before. So I know that's information that they keep really easily. So I just want to say that so you all remember to ask me for that, or if I don't volunteer it timely, you guys can remember that I said that I could get that information from Transy so we could compare it to everything else that we discussed pretty easily.
Very good. Go ahead, Reg.
Okay. Since Rochelle talked about Transy, and I want to go back to one of my closing remarks from last week, and that is that I really want us to do a lot of investigative work to come up with facts as we come up with recommendations. I appreciated Dr. Grisham Brown today. I would recommend Anthony and Sharon that we invite our 4 education leaders to this commission. And I'm speaking of Dr. Kalk, Dr. Capo. Rachel mentioned about apprenticeships. He certainly can talk a lot about that. Dr. Capilouto. And Rachel, you should know that just last week I met with the new president, Brian Lewis of Transylvania, met with him. I think they should be invited because certainly they, more than anyone else, can give us insight into the educational problems, the educational wish list, the educational concerns that they deal with on a day-to-day basis. I think we have to have their input in order to, again, do our job effectively. And particularly with Dr. Kalk and with President Capilouto, they can talk about both issues. We talk about not only the education issues that we've addressed today, but in terms of economic development and purchasing that needs to be done and spent on with the minority community. We can get 2 for the 1 talking to both of those gentlemen. So I would recommend anyway that we invite them to the committee. And also going back to what Patrice and I have been tasked with, we have a new education commissioner. It's a gentleman from Colorado who just recently been appointed to be the new commissioner of education here in Kentucky. I will begin reaching out to him today. I don't know if he's come here yet, but certainly I will invite him to attend this committee sometime during the month of August.
Very good.
I agree. I mean, all of the higher education and institutions that we have a lot in Lexington, and they're huge, if nothing else, neighbors in our community. And even if they, I think they have the ability to partner on maybe a lot of the stuff that we're asking for. So at a minimum, we should bring them in that regard.
Helps me not have to say it on behalf of him too. So I appreciate that Reggie recommended that, because I won't have to say something he don't want me to say or say something he will say. So great move.
Yeah. Keep too quiet, then Daryl. You still can't talk. You can't get out.
I know all those gentlemen well, and I tell you, I have no doubt that Dr. Capilouto, Dr. Kalk, Dr. Capo, all and President Lewis, who I just met, as I said, Rochelle last week, all of them would welcome time of this.
Absolutely.
And be free to answer questions and talk about the challenges they have. Trying to address the issues we've talked about today.
Thank you.
They're all good men.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that takes us to the end of the meeting, and we're gonna go ahead and close it out. I need a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
It's been properly moved in second. The meeting is now adjourned at 1:14 p.m. Thank you guys and have a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.